I'm a behavior analyst. I've been a behavior analyst for many years, since the late 70s, and I've been a board-certified behavior analyst since 2003, which was close to when that process started to happen. I'm here today to talk about behavior. I'm following, as I understand it, Tracy Harris and Ken Cranberg have did a couple of sessions that were school targeted for the most part, looking at their slides. And I'm here to talk, to kind of zoom out, if you will, to a kind of more wide-angle view of behavior and why behavior happens the way it does. So it's kind of an endless conversation. I'm here for an hour. And I welcome your comments and your questions. So please, as you go, if you have a point of clarification, I can stop during the progress through the slides to talk about that. I'll plan to leave a little time also at the end to address any questions that folks might have. So we're at our first. It's me. Okay, I direct a company, SD Associates. You can find our website right there, and we've been at this for quite some time. We provide assessment services, direct service consultation, and we work with schools, human service agencies, and families. We increasingly, since the passage of the 2010 autism, it's referred to as the autism law, but it's actually all kids with developmental disabilities. We've been providing insurance-funded support directly to families, and that's been really a delight. It has made things very clear, and the relationships very clear and very simple to be able to respond to children's needs and families' needs directly without any other filters. So that said, we're here today to talk about behavior. And every one of us changes how we behave in response to the events that surround it. Let me go back just a little bit here, though, to the title here. Anyone can punish, but we do it all the time. But can you reinforce? We do that all the time, but not always to our best advantage. So the notion here is all of us encounter behaviors in others, our children, our partners and spouses, people we need to interact with, and when things happen that we don't want to have happen at that moment, we respond very frequently. You can hear me here, doing a little adjustment. We respond with, oh, yes, there's some comments to that regard. Okay, maybe this works better. Does that sound better? Somebody can tell me. That's better. Okay, great. We respond with responses that we intend to stop a behavior. Typically, when you're stopping a behavior, you respond with something that's called punishment. Let me clarify at the outset here. One of the big kind of sticklers in talking about behavior is the language that we use. So culturally, we have certain values attached to words like punishment and positive and negative, which have ethical implications. Just when we hear them, we respond even viscerally in a certain way. On the other hand, as we will talk about, this terminology is also just simply describes how people respond to behavior. So that's kind of one of the sticking points in when people like myself talk to others about how to change behaviors, is that people respond to language. We haven't really done a good enough job yet of fine-tuning how we talk about these things. So we do want to be solving problems. Hang on here, a little technical moment. Okay. So I put as the additional title, to solve a behavior mystery, you need to think like a behavior detective. So my aim today is to take a good generic look at the elements that go into solving behavioral problems. There we go. Okay. So we all live in context. We live in a matrix of behavior, events that surround us. We behave in response to environments. People with disabilities respond in very specific kinds of ways also to events in their environments that compensate for their disabilities. So I'd like to just start with some of the basic assumptions about behavior. Number one, behavior is pragmatic, and whether you call it good or bad behavior, and that's also a contextual response. Good behavior is socially desired behavior, and bad behavior is socially undesired behavior. Regardless of whether it's good, quote-unquote good, or quote-unquote bad, it is behavior serves a function for the individual who is exhibiting that behavior. And nobody behaves in any way without meaning, I guess is the point. And behavior communicates. This is the other strong point about the pragmatism of a behavior. It communicates whether or not that communication is an intentional communication. So this is also where, where conversation sometimes bogs down around behavior. Somebody's saying they're not getting slides. Hang on. The problems of living in a technological age. Says that we only see the Vermont Family Network slide. We're working on it. Hooray. Yes, got him. Okay. All right. So, carrying on. Behavior is pragmatic. And this is fine. Okay. Behavior is contextual. Okay, where one is, who one is with, what one is doing, all help to define and determine the behavior that occurs. And events that follow behavior increase or decrease the likelihood that the behavior will happen again. So that's the important thing to consider when you are grappling with an issue, when you're grappling with a behavior that your child does. Number one, your child is telling you something when they behave that way. That's kind of the first step in the detective process. And the other thing to always keep in mind is there's a reason for that. And one of the reasons is their learning history, which is the point of this the bottom point on this slide. People do things that have worked for them in the past. So when somebody is screaming and crying and won't go to bed, they get a lot of interaction out of that, and functionally what happens, they put off their bedtime for a while. So that has worked for them, even though it appears at the moment this is a negative event. Kid's not happy, I'm not happy. It's still something, if those are behaviors that continue to happen, something is reinforcing those behaviors. And another basic assumption point here is that, and this is something that is typically missing from functional behavioral assessment, not always, but if you just simply look at antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, and don't take into account the individual's repertoire, then you're missing something. So your repertoire is your collection of things that you know how to do, things that have been reinforced for you. For all of us, this is a very complex topic. We have, every single one of us, we have categorical repertoires. We communicate, we take care of ourselves, we take care of the environment, we have motor skills that are better or worse, we're good at whatever. And then there's specific things that are within our repertoires because we have spent time learning how to do those things. Playing the guitar, using an iPad, juggling, riding around on your razor scooter. Any of these things are things that you have in your repertoire. Well, lots of times for people with disabilities or kids with disabilities, one of the big issues is that they don't have very big repertoires. They don't have lots of things that they know how to do that are pro-social and help them interact successfully with the world. And so having a big repertoire can be very, very useful. At times, it can also be problematic because the repertoire, the communication repertoire of a particular individual may not meet the motivation they have to obtain certain things that meet their needs. And we can talk more about that as time goes on. So the basics here, behavior laws exist. All of the ways in which we behave are lawful, and we have and here's another disconnect in terms of the language people typically use and language people like me use. Lawfulness in this case has nothing to do with the law. It has to do with cultural law. It has to do with the fact that the way we behave is not subject to chance. It's subject to all of the forces around us, and we behave in predictable ways based on our histories. Sometimes in the heat of the moment when something is problematic, that's easy to forget. But it's also useful in the long term if we are keeping that lawfulness in mind. Oh, my child is having a real hard time with this. They're doing this. They're hitting people. They're screaming they're yelling at their teacher, whatever. They're doing that for a lawful reason. And that has to do with what their needs are, what their history is, what their repertoire is, what are they able, in fact, to do. How much does the heightened emotion of a particular point in time, frustration or whatever, impact their ability to select the pro-social response that would be the ideal one at that particular moment. You hear lots of times, somebody gets into trouble and people say, don't do that, use your words. So, which is all well and good. Somebody may be able to hypothetically use their words at a moment of low stress, when at a moment of high stress, that is not their default response. So, but understanding behavioral law, we can change problem behaviors, we can teach other important behaviors, we can teach people to replace the problem behaviors that they have had with the right kind of support, even under stressful circumstances. So this brings us to the notion of antecedents and consequences. I did refer to behavior occurring in context. Okay, so all of these laws are at work all of the time, planned or unplanned, noticed or unnoticed, as in the examples that I give a little bit later. And every single thing you do is in response to something environmental where you make a decision about what to do next. Okay, so a long time ago, before technology, I would have just gotten the address to come here today, and somebody would have given me directions, and I would have been looking for a street sign, and that would be the trigger for me to turn left. and find the place. Now I have a GPS, and so a little voice tells me. So that also is lawful. So all of the responses I make a chain of probably 1,000 responses in order to get here today. Every single one of those is a lawful response. So the other point here at the bottom of the slide is it speaks to teaching people with relatively small behavioral repertoires. That's really why we do the work that we do. Behavior, ABA is what I do, and kind of a misunderstood thing about ABA is that behavior analysts are, in fact, teachers. Behavior therapy is an educative therapy, and it's our job to teach people how to do things. People tend to call a behavior analyst when bad things are happening, and from our perspective, we think, okay, why didn't you call us last year so that these bad things didn't even begin to start happening? But anyway, that's lawful as well. People are responding to stress by picking up the phone and saying, hey, can you help us? So let's look at the sequence here that occurs around lawful behavior. Of the antecedents, they start with motivation. We are motivated both to do things, and we are motivated not to do things. So one of the things, there's also technological language that goes with this. I'm trying to avoid as much as possible today, just so there's not too many hurdles. But what we do know about motivation is that some motivation is unconditioned, meaning you can do that without, it's not a learned response, and some is conditioned or learned. And conditioned motivation derives from previously reinforced behavior. Okay, meaning you have learned how to do something, and the better you do it, the more reinforcing that is. So, think of a more complex skill like reading, for instance. So learning how to read is a struggle for many people. It, however, opens up a world of opportunities. And once you begin to be able to read fluently, it's not a struggle for you anymore. You enjoy it. It provides you with reinforcement because you are skilled at it. So frequently you hear people talk about external reinforcement and intrinsic reinforcement. The reinforcement really is always, even when reinforcement is intrinsic, there are environmental events that still provide reinforcement for that. The switch means is that you're able to do that behavior with greater and greater independence. And more about that in a minute. So motivational states that exist in any individual at any given time. Hunger or thirst, your emotional states, what's your level of arousal or non-arousal at any particular point in time. We have lots and lots and lots and lots of labels for emotion, but they boil down basically to do you have a heightened state that has negative implications for you, or does it have positive implications for you? Do you feel good or do you feel bad? And then there's like a million labels to follow. So motivational states are caused by painful or pleasant sensations, by fatigue. If you are very, very tired, you are likely to respond in different ways than when you're well rested. Lots of times, people with disabilities are fatigued not just because they are sleep disordered, as some of you perhaps who have developmentally disabled kids have experienced sleep disorders, which are pretty prevalent. Reactivity to particular stimuli. Well, I was going to say about disability, it's also exhausting. I can tell you on a personal note, as I've gotten older, it's kind of there's a family history of progressive hearing loss. It requires a lot of effort and attention on my part to pay attention and listen to what people are saying, and that tires me out. So that has behavioral implications. Reactivity to particular stimuli. We all know individuals who don't like particular environments because they're too noisy, certain kinds of sounds, certain kinds of textures. There's a host of different things, and that's a very individual thing. Feeling too hot or too cold, having had too much or too little of something. So there, in that sense, you can switch from motivation to do to motivation not to do, depending upon the amount to which you've been exposed to something. So, you might love chocolate cake, and you might be hungry and very interested in eating some chocolate cake. But after you've had 5 or 6 slices, you're going to start feeling a little bit queasy, and then you're motivated not to do. So that third from the bottom bullet is kind of a common English rendition of the term satiation. Wanting to do things you do well, and here's the learned part, and wanting to avoid things that you don't do well. So, all of us have things that we spend our time doing that are highly reinforcing. We want to do them because we're good at them, basically. And if you don't get a good enough dose, then you want to do it some more. Myself, I play the guitar, and if I don't have the chance to do that, then I find myself highly motivated to be in a situation where I can spend some time doing that. Wanting to avoid things that you don't do well, we see this all the time, and this results in a lot of the behaviors that are very difficult, and certainly are very difficult for parents with kids with disabilities. A lot of the challenging behavior that we deal with has to do with attempts to avoid things that are unpleasant. So the next thing in the chain, and the antecedent chain here, are setting events. Okay, they're physical settings, activities, interactions that increase the likelihood that particular behaviors will occur. Kind of where are you and what are you doing is the question here. So a few examples. Places where things might happen, at home, at the store, at the beach, at work, in your car. There are behaviors that people do at home that they don't do anyplace else. Not just because they're at home, but because there's a host of other surrounding experiences and events that increase the likelihood that you will do some of those things at home, in your car. Back in the days when people, used to smoke tobacco. Hopefully people, not very many do anymore, but a lot of the therapy around smoking cessation was associated with driving and drinking coffee. So the car in that particular case was a setting event for people who smoke to indulge in their tobacco addiction, and that was a kind of a targeted point in therapy for addiction reduction. Activities in progress, driving in heavy traffic is a setting event. Being in math class, if you like math or if you don't like math, you're going to have some different kinds of responding from people. For kids who have struggled with math, math class is a setting event for raising your hand and asking if you can go to the bathroom. Sitting at the dinner table is another event. What do we have for supper tonight? Do we have pizza or do we have spinach? Both of which are setting events for different kinds of behaviors. And then there's interactional variables. Mom yelled at you before going to school, you just won an award, you didn't finish your homework, all produce states that increase the likelihood that you are going to respond in some way, okay? If you got yelled at, and you spent a bunch of time in conflict before getting to school when you're supposed to be calm and paying attention, that's going to affect you. If you didn't finish your homework, you have a level of anxiety about that's going to be that's going to trigger how you might respond. That brings us to kind of the last point. This is the tipping point in the chain here. People like me call them discriminative stimuli, or SDs. That's my company name. But these SDs are also referred to as triggers. What is the event that happens that sets off that particular response at that particular point in time? It doesn't really, it sets it off in the sense that it's not like you're not pulling the trigger on a gun here, but there's a signal in the environment that says do this behavior now. Okay? We encounter, every single human being encounters thousands of SDs every day. You're not aware of most of them. Okay? I look at the clock and I say, oh my gosh, it's 11:26. That's an SD for, I better hurry up here and make sure I make it through my slides. But their objects, actions, words, people, and other things in the environment are combinations of things in the environment to which one might respond very specifically. If you're sitting in math class and you haven't done your homework and the SD turn in your papers might produce one kind of response. If you have done your homework and you know you did it well, the SD turn in your homework, then might trigger a very different kind of response. Examples, things people say: fire, David. Somebody says my name, I turn and look at them. Thank you. That's social reinforcement. Please pass the salt. You respond with a motoric response. Time for bed. And that might be a trigger for an argument, depending on remember, the motivational state of fatigue or non-fatigue. Okay, if you feel fine and you don't want to go to bed yet, you might protest. Somebody saying or doing something, who that is may also be an SD. Your boss, your best friend, your mother, your worst enemy. And then actions or objects or actions in the environment. These are the ones that are continuous in how we respond. Traffic lights, the ever timer going off, signs and signals, a police cruiser in your rearview mirror. These are all SDs for how to respond next. And they're tied to what will happen when you respond in that particular way. And that brings us to the consequences for the behaviors that occur. So there are categorically 5 kinds of consequences. There's positive reinforcement, there's negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment, and extinction. So again, I can't emphasize too much, like the term behavior, the term consequence is value neutral. People use these words, for instance, to feel better about when they engine your consequences, to feel better about it. So if you look at lots of regular education, if you look at the school manual, in most schools, most of the consequences for undesired behaviors are in fact are intended to be punishment consequences. They may or may not be in actual function, but things like suspension and detention and being talked to by the principal and having to stay in from lunch recess and all of those things, you'll find people are saying, oh, well, this is, we don't do punishment. This is a consequence, which is, of course, nonsense. It is intended to be punishment. It's intended to reduce the behaviors that incurred that response. But consequences are not bad things that happen. Consequences are simply things that happen after a behavior. And those things are what determines whether or not that behavior is going to continue. If your kid has a behavior that's very interfering, and it keeps happening, there's something somewhere, that behavior serves a function for your kid, and something somewhere is reinforcing that behavior. Here's the schema. Some things go up, some things go down. The positive and negative reinforcement both increase or maintain or increase behavior. Positive punishment and negative punishment decrease behavior. Here's the technical terms. These are not, the notion of positive and negative in this case are not the cultural, don't have the meaning that the cultural uses of these terms have. So here's another picture. This is what positive and negative means. It has a closer alignment with the photographic positive and negative. Now that we all have, smartphones that take pictures, you don't see negatives anymore. But you used to get, using conventional film, an image like the one on the bottom that then the developing studio took and turned into the picture of the one on the top. They really mean present or remove, insert or take away, add or subtract. So in that sense, you're going to talk about reinforcement. If a behavior is reinforced, some dimension of that behavior, either it's how long it goes on for, how strong it is, or how often it happens, increases or stays the same. If a behavior is punished, some dimension of that behavior, again, how long it goes on for, how strong it is, or what the frequency is, decreases. So looking back up to the reinforcement in the middle here, if there's a problematic behavior, if your child tantrums for long periods of time, and those tantrums continue over time, something is reinforcing that behavior. People don't do the things they do for no reason. They do that because they work for them in some way. Here we go. Here's another schema. Positive reinforcement raises, maintains, or increases behavior because the reinforcer happens as a result of that behavior, happens right after that behavior. Here's some examples, okay, and these are like everyday life examples of how positive reinforcement works, even when you don't want it to. So Jenny yells at her toddler for crying in the grocery store, and the toddler cries louder. We've all seen this scenario. Kathy's supervisor gives her a bonus for increasing January sales. Her sales are even higher in February. That's an intended use of positive reinforcement, and it does what we would like it to do. The first example was not. You buy a scratch-off lottery ticket, and you win, and that means you go out and you buy more scratch-off lottery tickets. The interesting thing with addictive behavior like gambling is that you only very occasionally win, which in and of itself is a strong reinforcer. But the other piece is every single time you buy a lottery ticket, you get reinforced because you get to have this dream. They tell you you can't win if you don't have the ticket. So then you buy it and think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with $40 million? Which is pleasant. It's a pleasant sensation. Billy's teacher reprimands him in front of the class. We've seen this a million times, and keeps him in for lunch recess. And then Billy continues to do the same behaviors. Clearly what the teacher is doing is intended to be punishing, to reduce the behavior. But in point of fact, it backfires. And there's some way in which what the teacher does reinforces Billy in this particular case. And it may be the fact that, Billy wants to stay in for lunch recess and have the teacher all to himself. It may be that the social reinforcement that Billy gets in that situation from peers who either laugh or admire him or whatever is far outweighs the intended negative consequence. And the bottom one, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. So this brings us to negative reinforcement. People confuse frequently negative reinforcement with punishment. Negative reinforcement happens, again, like all of these lawful things, happens to us all the time. We behave in certain ways in order to make things better. We're trying to remove a state, an aversive stimulus, whatever, in order to be released from that. So the motivation that leads this chain that results in negative reinforcement, is one to basically escape a particular situation. We all go through this. Every single one of us that has deadlines to get something done, is in a state of pressure and anxiety until you do the thing that you need to do, and then what happens? Relief. That it's the pressure stops. On April 15th every year, you got to file your taxes, and after that's done, there's a sigh of relief. Okay, not until next year. Here's some other examples. So nagging is the popular term for prompting somebody. And so Sue relentlessly nags Jason to take out the trash, but stops after he does it. Okay, he's free. So he takes out the trash more frequently, or at least maintains that behavior. Why does he do that? He's doing that because when he does that, Sue doesn't nag him. Baby Julia cries incessantly unless she is being held. Her mom holds her longer and longer every day. Okay, we see this all the time with babes, and we pick them up, and of course, there's another function going on. Yes, there's negative reinforcement in this. There's negative, there's negative reinforcement for mom, because when she holds baby Julia doesn't cry. There's positive reinforcement for baby Julia. She cries, mom picks her up. That's what she wants. So always in any of these examples that involve a social component, more than one person, there's one kind of reinforcement for one person, another kind for the other. When in school, when a teacher sends a child who doesn't want to be in the class to time out, that the kid escapes. Okay, that's the kid is positively reinforced for quote unquote bad behavior. The teacher at the same time is negatively reinforced because she gets rid of a nuisance situation for a period of time. Turning off the lights is a self-contained example. Managing the stressors in your environment eases your discomfort. That's an example of negative reinforcement. Turning off the lights if you have a headache. When you see a police cruiser in the your rearview mirror, the behavior you do is to carefully observe the speed limit, and then the policeman breaks the speed limit and cruises by you at 80 miles an hour because he's not going to stop you because you're following the law. There's relief when that happens. That's negative reinforcement. And then the last example is taking care of things that are a danger, and when you take care of them, then you're able to do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So, and then it brings us to punishment. Make sure I get through this here. We got 20 minutes to go. Again, positive punishment and negative punishment are two different kinds of punishment. Basically, they both reduce behavior. They take away the occurrence of behavior in the future. Punishment happens to all of us. So, an example is, none of us who have any kind of history with it touch a hot stove. It will burn you. That's a lesson you may have learned once in your life, and it was punishing, and you remember it forevermore. The motivation that started that, however, had to do with being cold and seeking warmth. So you're seeking positive reinforcement, but then you inadvertently encounter punishment. So, some examples. And Gertrude has bad breath, but always kisses her niece when Jenny visits. Jenny seldom visits anymore. That's positive punishment. That means something happens when you visit, and that reduces your visiting behavior. So the next one is also positive punishment. Martha flies into a screaming rage when George breaks a glass. George is very careful and does not break china in the future. George is punished for breaking china. Martha is positively reinforced for screaming because that reduces, that gets George not to do that. Actually, she's negative reinforced. She's worried when George is handling glass, and she when she screams at him, that doesn't happen anymore. If you're grounded for staying out too late, which happens to many teenagers, that's an example of negative punishment. Something is being taken away. And then after the grounding period, Jonathan was not late again. The behavior was reduced. Baby Sarah throws up after her mom gave her watermelon to eat. Her mom never fed her watermelon again. So for baby Sarah, that was negative reinforcement. For mom, it was punishing when your child throws up. And then you avoid doing the thing that caused that person to in fact, be nauseated. And the final example here is obvious. This brings us to the fifth here, and we run into this all the time. Extinction. Extinction is when a behavior that was previously reinforced in some way is not anymore. And so there's lots of kind of colloquial tags that we put on the extinction situation, one of which is if somebody decides to do something about a behavior and they begin a plan to not reinforce a behavior that has been reinforced before, you're warned that the behavior will get worse before it gets better. That's how we typically describe what is known as an extinction burst, which happens a lot of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time. That's because the behavior that the kid is doing worked for him or her, and when it no longer works, that's problematic. What do? Here's some examples. So Johanna, on the advice of her son's pediatrician, stopped picking up the baby when he cried at bedtime. And she got an extinction burst. The baby cried louder than ever for 3 days. Johanna held her breath and somebody coached her and she managed not to respond. It's very difficult. I've been through this several times myself with kids at bedtime. And then the baby starts going to sleep right away when put to bed. So basically, the kid is not crying because this is terrible. The kid's crying because they want you to pay attention to them. When the power went off, we tried turning on several light switches, but finally stopped when nothing worked. So that's mechanical extinction for trying to make something work. This happened to me today. Getting here, I was a little late because I went in the bottom door. The elevator didn't work, and I didn't see the sign. So I stood there pushing the button, and it didn't work. So finally, I shrugged my shoulders and went away and saw the sign that said, elevator out of order. Well, duh. So I walked around the side of the building. People complain about things, and frequently it's not. So Bethany here, the problem isn't a boo-boo. The problem is getting mom's attention. And so what mom is doing is she's ignoring the boo-boo requests, and then hopefully reinforcing other kinds of requests for attention. So we see a lot with kids. People tease. We have here Jordan yelling at Marlene. Marlene bursts into tears. And lots of times the advice we give kids is he's only doing that to get your goat. So don't give him the attention he wants. Don't reinforce him by losing your cool. This brings us to repertoire. Back to repertoire. And back to the title of this particular webinar, anybody can punish, but can you reinforce? The answers to the problems that we have with kids, with spouses, with the world around us, with the world of work, have to really do with building repertoire. Punishment certainly exists, and it exists whether we want it to or not. We occasionally, sometimes, use punishment, but when we use it, we need to make sure that we also teach a replacement response. So there's in behavior analysis, there's a rule for designing plans. It's called the fair pair rule, which means whenever you try to get rid of a behavior, you need to make sure that you replace that with a behavior. To my mind, that's not a fair pair rule, but rather what we should be doing is whenever there's a behavior that you want to reduce, and there certainly are behaviors you want to reduce. If somebody's hitting somebody, that, without question, you want to make sure that happens less often. But what's the answer to that? The answer is not necessarily always that there be an immediate negative response. It may be using extinction in some way so that you can reduce the power, the communicative power of that behavior. But what you really need to do is teach other things to do. That brings us back to, I think I used as an example early in this discussion, when somebody says, don't do that, use your words. Well, absolutely. Using your words, you may have those words. You may have repertoire where, hypothetically, you know how to ask for what you want without resorting to violence and using language to do that. However, there are a number of things that impinge on that. Again, thinking back to that chain I talked about, it may have to do with the setting you're in, or the setting and the trigger may vastly reduce your ability to use language to mediate something that's difficult for you. There's been a lot of talk lately. At one point in time, people routinely use timeout, which timeout is not a terrible thing. The reason why there's been a lot of concern about timeout is that people overuse that practice. But timeout really means, it's short for timeout from positive reinforcement, meaning, okay, stop. Okay, it's really an interrupter when used correctly. What we do a lot nowadays is that we teach self-regulation. We want people, a lot of the reasons why people act out when they're under stress and don't use their words is because they don't know how to manage their level of arousal, and they don't know how to do that without some help. So we spend a bunch of time with kids who have these kinds of challenges, teaching them to, in one way or another, to self-regulate, to calm themselves down. That's for kids with serious challenges and small repertoires. That's something that they need to learn how to do. So it's easier to learn how to calm yourself down when things are not too stressful. It's a lot easier to do that than waiting to the moment of stress and then trying to intervene. This is why you see, many of the kind of behavior plan consequences that people come up with really not working very well over a period of time. And that's because they only implement those procedures when it's really difficult for the kid to actually do the behavior. And the more you practice something, the buzzword I always say is practice makes perfect. The more you practice something, the better you get at it. And if you have somebody if the SD is the trigger from the caregiver is, it would be good to calm down now, or please calm down, or whatever. And you practice that and you get, in fact, rewarded for that, for doing that the right way, reinforced for doing that the right way. And you get lots and lots of practice with that. When things are not too stressful, you're a lot more likely to be able to respond to that when things are stressful. And that's because you know what to do at that point. You've practiced it. You know what it means when your teacher or your parent or whatever says, okay, calm down, please. And you also know that when you do that successfully, you're going to be able to use your words. You're going to be able to solve some problems. So kind of a final word about punishment and small repertoires. We serve a lot of kids. We serve kids who have lots of words, who can talk a lot, but they do not necessarily use that language in the ways in which neurotypical people do. Okay, we use a lot of the way that we use language is to talk ourselves through all kinds of things on a daily basis. So you may have a kid with a big vocabulary, but that doesn't mean he knows how to coach himself. And then again, we have many kids who, so in that case, with a kid who knows how to say a lot of stuff, their repertoire issue is that they have a diminished repertoire when it comes to problem solving, basically, because when problem solving involves using language to mediate events. We also have lots of kids who really have very limited verbal skills, who can only say 10 things. And they need lots of support. We do AAC support or low-tech support to help them out in these moments so that they can make choices before they have to engage in behaviors that come as their default setting. If you have a kid that when they're stressed, bites himself on the arm, engages in some kind of self-injury, that kid has a long history with that, and it is a communicative behavior. The problem is it's not a specific communicative behavior. It means figure out what's wrong and help me. And then people scramble around, and they figure out what's wrong, and they help him. The reality is you got to catch that kid before he bites his arm and give him a way to communicate much more successfully. We call that FCT, or functional communication training. The take-home message here is that punishment decreases repertoire. It decreases behavior. Those behaviors are part of repertoire. So if you take the kid that I just talked about who bites himself on the arm, and you punish that response, you don't teach them, you don't use the fair pair rule and then some, I've got a question here. I'll try and give a minute or two to answer. If you don't teach them something else to do, then their world gets even smaller. Okay, what I really need to be doing is teaching what to do versus what not to do. So we got 5 minutes here. The question is, you stated earlier that you often see kids when the problem has become significant. How can parents better advocate for earlier BCBA involvement in school situations, such as the development of an FBA? I think what you need to do is get acquainted with the law on functional behavior assessment. Frequently, schools kick in way down the chain. They wait till bad things are happening. At the first emergence of the way the IDEA is written, at the first emergence of significant problem behavior, that's the time when the school should be doing functional assessment to figure out. And you don't have to have a disability yet. If they're at the point at which the people in school are starting to talk about whether or not this kid has a significant problem, that's the time to do the FBA, and that's the time to call them about it. What I tell people always is that you really need to advocate for your kids pretty relentlessly. The kids who get responses are the kids who have strong advocacy, and that's lawful too. And this is the people that you're dealing with in those situations are not bad people. They're people who have different motivation than you do. They're people who are trying to maintain for them status quo. So that's also this is a sit on your hands moment. If you're an advocate for getting appropriate services for your child, you need to do that as relentlessly, but as dispassionately as possible, because otherwise people aren't going to respond to your message. They're going to respond to your level of emotion, which may not be as successful. So I hope that helps. There's some more questions here. How do you include the child or client in the detective work? Can a parent share observations with the child towards joint problem solving? Absolutely. For kids who have the skills to do that, frequently teaching them to recognize and monitor their own behavior goes a long way towards actually having them develop that awareness and actually reducing. Kids can change their own behavior when they participate. It's another question here. A follow-up question. It seems like parents and schools should be working together to use the same approach at school and at home. How often do you see schools and families working together for consistency for the child? Hopefully, yes, sometimes quite a bit. Hopefully this will happen more and more. One of the problems, I think, with this particular problem is that it's kind of the fragmentation of social services in our society. So school is school, home is home. So significant supports for parents with disabilities on the home front are frequently not necessarily connected with what happens at school. And interestingly, I'm running out of time here. Interestingly, I can go over a little bit. We do a lot of insurance work since the 2010 disability insurance law. People call it the autism law, but it really covers any kids with developmental disabilities. And the interesting thing about that is the need from the insurance company is articulated as very specific. They want evidence-based treatment that will only fund evidence-based treatment, which is what we do. When you turn around and you go into a school setting, you have a large number of people with large biases of their own, of a variety of them. People think this works, that works, this is what I like to do. They get reinforcement by doing things the way that they like to do them. So it's a whole nother ball of wax. We are, unfortunately, we're not at state of the art yet in terms of consistency, throughout the lifetime of somebody with a disability. So lots of times kids go every day from one situation to another, and things are responded to one way in one situation and another way in another. And the cases, and we do have some cases where we do what we call wraparound, where we follow the kid in their school program and in their home program. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, those are the programs that work the best. It would be nice to see more of that. So another question, can parents use these detective skills to raise awareness and change their own behaviors in reaction to their child's behaviors? Absolutely. Frequently, some help in figuring that stuff out. It's good to have an objective look at things. So I think the kind of buzzword, the saying around this particular topic is, if you want to change other people's behavior, you have to change your own behavior. And if you think back to the examples I gave today, what's punishment for one person is reinforcement for the other. And lots of times parents continue to do the things they do because they are momentarily effective, He stops when I tell him to stop. I hear that one a lot. But they're not effective in the long term because they need to keep saying stop. So those are the kinds of things that might be useful. Rages can be dangerous and frightening for the whole family. In your experience, is there a typical motivational state for a child who rages? Well, it's a personal issue, basically. So this is where the detective work comes in. What is the motivation at this particular point in time? What happens when the child rages? Finally, is there some level of catharsis for that kid that brings them peace when they're drained of all of the acting out that they're going to do at that particular moment? Do they obtain everybody's focused attention for that behavior? Does that mean that at some other point in their life, if you want to prevent this from happening, does that kid need to get that kind of intensity of attention that they get when they're in a rage for behaviors that are more pro-social than that? So there's a whole, I guess the answer to that is there's not one answer, but it's one behavior. We see these behaviors in kids, again, that have small repertoires. We sometimes call that being response poor, meaning they use the same kind of responding to solve a variety of problems. So that's the detective piece there. If most of the communication is nonverbal, how much does a parent need to look at his or her own nonverbal skills? Very much so. We communicate by presence, we communicate by attention, we communicate by how we hold our bodies also. So, if you respond, particularly when trouble is happening, this is not necessarily the most effective thing is for you to respond in a way physically so that you're not communicating that you're communicating security. You're not communicating that you are threatened by the behavior, particularly frightened by it. I know this is a tall order, but there have been lots of studies of people, muggers in the city, and who do they select as victims? They select people who walk like victims, and they don't stop people and mug them if they're walking, if they're self-assured and they look like they know where they're going and they look like they know what they're doing. These are nonverbal signs that people read. And I've got one more question here. We're running a little bit over. What advice would you give parents who are experiencing challenging behaviors of their child? The advice I would get is to actually, there's a couple of things. One of which is to internalize this kind of information. There's a few good books out there for lay people. One of them is called Don't Shoot the Dog. And I should have put this on a slide, but Don't Shoot the Dog. It's by Karen Pryor. And that's an excellent book on problem-solving problem behaviors. There's a book by John Bailey and Mary Birch, B-U-R-C-H, entitled How to Think Like a Behavior Analyst. And there's another book by a fellow named Bobby Newman that I think it's entitled How to Be a Behavior Detective, which is a great resource. Bobby Newman also wrote a book, or it's actually a compendium. Some of the chapters are by parents. It's called Walk with a Purpose. And that's also a great book, because it talks about very common, family-based issues. If you have a pervasive and enduring problem, you should get help. This is what behavior analysts do. It's a growing profession, but I think Vermont is close to 60 at this point, behavior analysts, and schools should be using behavior analysts. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Advocate for it. If you have private insurance in Vermont and you have a child with a developmental disability, that insurance, by law, needs to cover home-based support. We're working hard on getting equal access for folks who have Medicaid but not private insurance. So we're out of time. Thanks for joining us today's webinar, and please visit VFN's website at www.vermontfamilynetwork.org for helpful resources, including the archived webinars and upcoming events. And if you'd like to talk to someone at VFN, please call 800-800-4005 and have a great day. Thank you.